This week's tip is about how to pick up stitches along a vertical edge or a selvage edge in knitting. And I've picked up stitches along this, and notice that first of all, this column of stitches is immediately next to the band, and that it is a straight column. When you're picking up stitches, you want to make sure that you don't jut over into the middle of that stitch. It's a really tacky looking thing, and that's one of the things you want to avoid. Now when you're picking up stitches, you are picking them up in the same location that you would use the mattress stitch. Here's a swatch that I worked in really big with really big needles, and where I would be picking up stitches is, here is my first column of stitches that is next to my selvage stitch, and I see these horizontal bars. I'm going to be inserting my needle in the space between those horizontal bars and picking up stitches. Now when you're picking up stitches on a vertical edge, you have a problem. On a horizontal edge, it's easy. I pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches, one for every column of stitches. But when you're picking up along a vertical edge, you have the issue that there are more rows per inch than stitches per inch. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and again, I'm not measuring gauge here. This would absolutely the worst way to do it possibly, but I just want to show you the basic principle. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have a problem that if I pick up one stitch for every row, I'm going to be picking up too many stitches. So what do? Well, when I go to pick up stitches, I want to, as I'm picking up, I want to pick up 4 stitches for every 5 rows. So that means 1, 2, 3, and then I would pick up a stitch. I would combine those two guys together, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's taken in 5 rows. Now that's all well and good, but one of the things that you need to take into consideration is the gauge of the band you are picking up. If I am picking up a stockinette or a siege stitch band or a garter stitch band where the stitch and row gauges, well actually cancel that for garter stitch. If it's similar, primarily stockinette, then I would use that formula. But what do I do when I'm picking up ribbing, which is the most common form? Well, ribbing has a very different stitch gauge than stockinette, and so I can figure out what that is and do the calculation that way. But then I have to also factor in what fiber am I using. Is it going to stretch? Because you don't want a droopy ribbing. All of these factors come into play with how many stitches to pick up. It's much more complicated than a lot of books would lead you to think. Now, I'll go more into that into the blog itself. But as to how to actually pick up stitches, let's say I'm going to be picking up stockinette here. If I can find an end, I would insert my needle into the first place I want to pick up a stitch, and that is right here. I insert it in, I have my yarn, and I pull the stitch through. Now you can also use a crochet hook for this if you're more comfortable. 1, 2, 3. I'm not used to working with these gigantimous needles, but I want you to be able to see the stitches. Okay, now here's where I'm going to skip 2 horizontal bars, and then 1, 2, 3, and then skip. Now what I do when I am picking up any band is I save my gauge swatch, and that is where I practice the different ratios that I can use to pick up my band and test it out. And that's a better use than picking up all of the stitches on a band, because every time you insert a needle into a hole you make it bigger, and if I am ripping out constantly along the band, that's going to make this fairly ragged.